Senator Singh.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy, Senator Conroy. Given that the ACCC has approved Telstra's structural separation undertaking, can the Minister advise the Senate what this means for telecommunications industry reform?
Minister for Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy, Senator Conroy.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the Senator for her question. Mr President, as everyone in the telecommunication industry knows, Telstra's vertical integration has been the single greatest barrier to healthy competition in this sector. Today's approval by the ACCC implements the Gillard government's decision to structurally separate Telstra, a reform that previous governments have failed to undertake. First, under the Hawke government, when it decided to merge Telecom Australia with OTC in the early 1990s, and then compounded by the Howard government in privatising Telstra as the dominant vertically integrated wholesale and retail provider until today. These decisions, Mr President, have contributed to 2 decades of market failure in the telecommunications industry, a point made by the ACCC just last week, and I quote, "Telstra retains a dominant position in both retail and wholesale markets, and despite the deployment of competitive infrastructure in some geographic areas over the past decade, on a national basis, competition for the supply of wholesale ADSL services is not effective." Mr President, this was the competitive environment that we inherited, but the structural separation of Telstra is a watershed reform that will pave the way for competition in fixed-line telecommunications services for the first time in Australian history. It is a reform I previously described, Mr President, as the holy grail of microeconomic reform in the telco sector. It is a reform that Telstra shareholders have voted overwhelmingly for, and one the industry has been crying out for. And it is reform. And you've just announced today, you fool, that you're buying the copper.
Senator Conroy.
Sorry, Mr President.
That should be withdrawn.
My apologies, Mr President. I withdraw.
And you need to resume your seat. Your time's expired. Senator Singh.
Supplementary, Mr President. Can the Minister inform the Senate what the ACCC's decision means for Australian consumers and businesses?
The Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. The National Broadband Network is the vehicle to enable the full structural separation of Telstra. The ACCC decision paves the way for the decommissioning of Telstra's copper network and the progressive migration of customers onto the NBN. Unlike those opposite, Mr President, whose spokesperson today blogged that he's going to direct NBN Co to buy the copper network. To buy. Talk about renationalising. You're ordering NBN to buy it back. To buy back the copper. Read his blog today. That's right, yeah. Has it been to shadow cabinet?
Senator Conroy, address the comments to the Chair.
Mr President. The NBN, Mr President, will be the first open-access, wholesale-only platform for the delivery of telecommunications services in Australia. It will level the playing field for all service providers.
Time has expired. Time's expired. Senator Singh.
Can the Minister advise the Senate of any other broadband plans that could critically impact on rolling out the NBN to families and businesses in rural and regional Australia?
The Minister.
Mr President, there are now 35 service providers who have signed up to deliver services over the NBN, providing broadband plans beginning from as little as $29.95 a month, Mr President, just under $30 a month. All those claims from those opposites, prices were going up, prices were going to be higher, services were going to be poorer. Well, Mr President, they've all been exposed as absolute rubbish. But there is only one party, Mr President, only one party that is guaranteeing universal prices, and that is the Labor Party, the Labor government. Under the coalition, families and business in the bush will pay more and get less service. The Coalition have even committed to abolishing the cross subsidy, Mr President, for those that live in the bush, treating our rural and regional Australians like second-class citizens by offering them a voucher.
Time's expired. Time's expired. Before